Cyberpunk. All right, then check this out. Ready now?
So by this point, we all know the studio CD Projekt Red, a studio so beloved for their work on The Witcher 3, some people consider them to be the good guys of AAA gaming, and we all know the fact that their most recent release, Cyberpunk 2077, is kinda trash.
This nigga is trash.
The game CD Projekt and every damn Twitter account with an anime avatar hyped up to be one of the most innovative, impactful, remembered games of this generation for 8 damn years straight, finally comes out and is filled with so many bugs and glitches that it makes the game damn near unplayable, which left many upset and confused about how this game that was in development for so long could come out like this. Well, that's what I want to talk about, mainly because I read too many articles about this pre-launch and did too much damn research on this to just explain this shit to my friends who aren't that in the know on gaming news anyway. So I did some extra digging around, and by digging around I mean I got other people's articles and reports, not just copy and pasted their words into this text document, and found that this failure of a launch was bound to happen at some point for CD Projekt. Since the least purposely built Cyberpunk, the Witcher series, and the entire work culture at CD Projekt Red on that good old BioWare magic. With the leads completely mismanaging development time on the game, so they willfully crunch developers for the final months or even year, all with the added bonus of public deception. To talk about CD Projekt's lead's mistreatment of staff and how it led to Cyberpunk's horrible release, we gotta go back to 2014, a year before the release of The Witcher 3, when an anonymous post, later confirmed by an administrator to be someone from inside the Witcher 3 dev team, was made on NeoGAF, stating this about the work conditions the team was under. Quote, "The bullshitting with The Witcher 3 started from day one. PR is creating an overblown vision of a game that doesn't exist, while the team is in crazy crunch time for over a year now." This quote establishing, even back in the Witcher days, that management at CDPR had already established a company work culture built on unnecessarily crunching developers and using their PR team to mask said crunch with flowery words and visuals of their up and coming game that may not equal to what the game actually looks like. CDPR would go on to decline to respond to the accusations from this post. On May 13th, 2015, The Witcher 3 released, and on day one it was filled with many of the same bugs and glitches we're currently seeing in Cyberpunk, such as missing textures, various quest progression blocking bugs, and poor optimization on consoles, alongside non-attackable enemy NPCs, infinite loading screens, and lost save files, just to name a few. So obviously, as we all know, despite all that, it went on to be one of the most critically acclaimed games in recent history, garnering 9 and 10 out of 10 reviews from almost every outlet and getting a score at 92 on Metacritic. In its first 2 weeks, The Witcher 3 sold 4 million units and helped bring in $90 million in profits for CD Projekt by the end of 2015. The team at CD Projekt then went on to release the Heart of Stone DLC and Blood and Wine DLC for The Witcher 3 on October 13, 2015 and May 31, 2016 respectively, to roughly the same fanfare as the base game. Needless to say, this game helped pave the way for CD Projekt to become one of the biggest studios in gaming, reaching a market value of $2.3 billion in 2017 and entering Poland's WIG20 at the start of 2018, only to top that in 2019 by becoming the most valuable gaming company in the EU, valued at $8.13 billion, more than half of the $16.13 billion Take-Two Interactive was valued for at the time. Telling me that all this monetary success and public adulation they received for The Witcher 3 is telling the heads at CD Projekt that everything they did to get The Witcher 3 to be the beloved game that it is how they should continue to run their studio. Even them working their devs to the bone, whether we like it or not, is justified to them because of all the success they were seeing off of developing the game with a crunch culture in place. They see crunch as much of a part of their path to success as they see the depth that they put into an open world environment for The Witcher 3. In the middle of The Witcher 3's development, in 2012, CD Projekt announced that their new game, Cyberpunk 2077, was entering development. Now, CD Projekt goes about development in what they like to call a rockstar model, meaning they put the majority of their studio behind one big game at a time instead of dividing the studio up into different teams to all work on their own games independent from one another. So even though they announced that they started development on Cyberpunk 2077 in 2012, since they didn't really finish The Witcher 3 until its 2 DLCs were finished and released, the whole studio wasn't behind the development of Cyberpunk until 2016. A game that Poland no less will go on to help fund, most likely due to the financial success that The Witcher 3 was, not only for CD Projekt, but for Poland as a country. Like for real, these games are so important to Poland, they even gave Obama a copy of The Witcher 2 as a gift, bruh.
My nigga obese.
In 2016, Poland's National Center for Research and Development granted CD Projekt with roughly $7 million towards Cyberpunk for the goals of developing video game city creation, seamless multiplayer, cinematic feel, and animation excellence, whatever the fuck that actually means. Also around this time, the studio was basically put on hold from even starting work on Cyberpunk due to CDPR's Red engine that was used for The Witcher 3 and planned to be used for Cyberpunk having to be overhauled drastically to fit things like constructing tall buildings, shooting mechanics, vehicles, and almost every other thing that was planned for Cyberpunk in the first place. Later in 2017, anonymous reviews on Glassdoor from former CDPR employees, mostly from the Witcher 3 team, were posted criticizing the studio for its insane crunch, low payment, chaotic decision making, and poor management. Marcin Nowinski, CD Projekt's co-founder, and Adam Badowski, the studio head, responded to these criticisms at the time with, quote, "This approach to making games is not for everyone. It often requires a conscious effort to reinvent the wheel, even if you personally think it works like a charm. But you know what? We believe in reinventing the wheel every freaking time is what makes a better game." Basically saying if you ain't with it,
Get the fuck out of here, nigga.
Nowinski and Badowski responded to these criticisms horribly in my opinion. With this quote, they aren't actually saying these things didn't actually happen under their watch, nor are they taking responsibility for these accusations and painting some "we learned from our past mistakes and we're better now" type of atmosphere for CD Projekt's development strategy. All they're doing is extremely downplaying these criticisms with the line, quote, "This approach to making games is not for everyone," making it seem as if developers wanting to work a job without being forced into working consistently inhumane hours with low pay and a completely dysfunctional management team as something that's absurd to want. So after finishing up work on The Witcher 3 and starting on the road of Cyberpunk's development, the leads at CDPR went relatively silent on anything Cyberpunk for a while, only showing another CGI trailer followed by some vertical slice gameplay at E3 2018. That is until the next year at E3 2019 when they announced Cyberpunk's release date of April 16, 2020 for PS4, Xbox One, PC, and Stadia.
Cuz, what the fuck? Come on, cuz!
Following this announcement, Marcin Nowinski, CD Projekt's co-founder, started to shed light on Cyberpunk's development and all but confirmed the crunch rumors from The Witcher 3 development in an interview with Kotaku. He stated that CDPR now has, quote, a non-obligatory crunch policy so that they have a more humane approach to late-stage development. Now, if you notice, he didn't fully commit to saying that they wouldn't have crunch for Cyberpunk 2077. He left it more ambiguous by saying, quote, I think we could promise that it will be better than The Witcher's finishing period. We've been communicating clearly to people that, of course, there are certain moments where we need to work harder, but we want to be more humane and treat people with respect. If they need time to take off, they can take that time off. Nobody will be frowned upon if this will be requested. Now, this type of response shows some level of acknowledgement that a work environment built on crunch, like the one instilled for The Witcher 3's development, isn't good, but at the same time shows that the higher ups still believe they can pull off some bullshit magic when it comes to finishing the game like they did for the Witcher series. Specifically citing that your late stage development will still have crunch, but just not as bad as The Witcher 3's, comes off as if you truly don't understand that the idea of crunch work in general is what was fucked up about The Witcher's work environment for the developers in the first place. When January of 2020 came around, CD Projekt had to put out a statement saying that they would have to delay Cyberpunk from its initial April 16th release date now to September 17th, also mentioning that they were, quote, at a state where the game is complete and playable, but there's still work to be done. We need more time to finish playtesting, fixing, and polishing. Now, while this did come as a disappointment to many, I'd say most fans were understanding, mostly due to CDPR's public statement about the then current state of the game just needing to be polished and tuned for its release, and Iwinski's public statement about the studio's non-obligatory crunch policy going forward, as stated in a Kotaku interview, in combination with the 5 months the game was being pushed back for, taking all this to mean that the studio was trying to make sure that they put out the best product they could without unnecessarily rushing any part of the game's development.
No way.
That hope was quickly let down, with CD Projekt confirming in an investor Q&A that they will make the team behind Cyberpunk work longer hours than usual, despite the 5 months that they're delaying the game for, giving them more time.
We got you.
Quote, we try to limit crunch as much as possible, but it is the final stage. We try to be reasonable in this regard. But yes, unfortunately, stated Adam Kiesinski, the other co-founder of CD Projekt, referring to having the devs work crunch hours. Also that the team was, quote, focused on the current generation of consoles when asked about the studio's plans for developing Cyberpunk and if they were shifting more towards developing for the, at the time, soon to be released PS5 and the Xbox Series. The Xbox Series is the fucking Xbox. CDPR Krakow's boss John Mamias added that, quote, CDPR's culture of hard work is not a good fit for everyone. We get a lot of new guys coming in and they go, oh god, this is too much. But then we get other guys come in from Rockstar Games and they're like, this is not even crunch.
The fuck that gotta do with me?
I just want to take a quick aside to paint the picture of the comparison Mamias just made. He's comparing the conditions that CD Projekt puts their devs under to Rockstar Games, the studio that in 2018 allowed employees to speak to outlets in which some of those employees working there said that the conditions they were under for Red Dead Redemption 2's development were so difficult that it, quote, cost friends, family time, and mental health. The same place where people said that they were, quote, planning to leave because they felt mistreated and were infuriated by Rockstar's co-founder and former vice president Dan Houser's comments implying that overtime at the company was voluntary when he was bragging that they were working near 100-hour work weeks on the game. This is who CD Projekt is using as a measuring stick of humane work conditions. On June 18, 2020, CD Projekt put out another statement pushing Cyberpunk back again, this time from September 17th to November 19th. Quote, we won't ship something which is not ready, they said in a statement. Cyberpunk 2077 is finished in both content and gameplay wise. The quests, the cutscenes, the skills, and items. We need to properly go through everything, balance game mechanics, and fix a lot of bugs. Now this statement, while sounding good and reinforcing the it'll be out when it's ready message left at the end of the game's announcement trailer, is a serious contradiction to what we already know about Cyberpunk's work conditions surrounding its development at this time. We were already told back in January that the leads deemed crunch as a necessity to finish the game. Crunch, which usually serves more as a practice to meet a deadline you have approaching, not to ensure that whatever you're putting out is of quality like the statement, we won't ship something which is not ready, is implying. If they were truly trying to ensure the game met a quality standard they had in mind, they wouldn't be crunching developers in the first place because it's 1, irresponsible and wrong, and 2, taxing on your staff and causes more harm than good to your project. In the end, you'll be spending more time cleaning up mistakes made within the game due to people working on it past their level of actual productivity than you would actually, spend making the fucking game. At this point, Everything sort of went back to relative silence when it came to news about Cyberpunk from CDPR leads themselves. And that's when Jason Schreier walks in. On September 29th, Schreier got private information from an anonymous CDPR employee, stating that employees were told Monday, September 28th, 2020, that 6-day work weeks will be mandatory to the November release. In an internal email, CD Projekt staff studio head Adam Badowski wrote, quote, "The entire studio is in overdrive, your typical amount of work in one day of the weekend. I know this is in direct opposition to what we've said about crunch, also to what he believes, quote, that crunch should never be the answer, but we've extended all other possible means of navigating the situation." Schreier also added that an employee stated that some staff had been putting in nights and weekends on the project for more than a year at that point. In the email, Badowski also mentioned that the game has been sent off to Microsoft and Sony to get certified for release. He then goes on to say that the November 19th release date won't be changed and that now is the time they need to fix the game's many lingering bugs and glitches. Everything in this email reads as complete bullshit.
It's that bullshit, Mo.
Because if you truly thought crunch should never be the answer, then you wouldn't be sending this email in the first place telling your staff to work these crunch hours. If the game is truly in a state that you deem you need more time to work on fixing its problems, just push the release date back instead of being stubborn on the one you already have. You already did it twice anyways. On October 5th, CD Projekt announced that Cyberpunk was certified gold, which in the meanest of layman terms means the game is able to be completed from beginning to end, has passed platform compliance certification, and is ready for a full release, but doesn't necessarily mean that the current state of the game is completely bug-free. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that by Polish law, CD Projekt has to pay employees who work extra hours overtime pay, and on top of that, CD Projekt gives the entire staff a year-end bonus amounting up to 10% of the company's annual profit to be divided amongst all the staff. I mention that just because I know someone would try to throw that at me to defend CD Projekt's practices. As if this little bit of extra money makes everything management put their team under justified, even though people's personal lives and mental and physical health were put at risk due to these practices, and no amount of money is worth that. To back up my point, on October 9th, Schreier in a tweet shared a screenshot of an internal email from Lewinsky to Cyberpunk staff back in June apologizing for the conditions they had to work under. Quote, "If I could wish for anything, I would like to humbly ask you to endure in the effort to deliver the game. I would also like to extend an apology to your partners and ask for their support as well. Dear partners, I am fully aware that the hard work of your loved ones often means they cannot participate on the home front, but I promise this is the last stretch and the finish line is near. All this hard work is going to lead to Cyberpunk 2077 becoming one of, if not the most memorable game of this generation. I'm sure of that." Now, if you were Adam, you wouldn't feel the need to apologize for having people work crunch hours if you believe that the extra pay was actually worth it, would you? Because in this statement, Lewinsky is showing that he understands that this type of heinous work is straining and damaging the CD Projekt's employees' personal lives, but that he and the rest of the people in charge still deem Cyberpunk to be more important than the people making it by asking them to continue to work on it, even under these obviously destructive conditions. And if Adam thought any of the bonus money, either through overtime hours or the yearly profit bonus, would be an actual incentive for developers to continue working like this, he would have mentioned it in the email, but instead he didn't, because he and every other person on the board knows that if they did that, they would receive vigorous blowback from the developers. It feels like Adam and the board are trying to downplay the continuation of the devs having to work under these hostile conditions by wording the remaining weeks of development as being near the finish line, making it sound as if all they have to do is put in a little bit of extra hours for a short time frame to finish the game, which is purposefully disregarding the fact that they've been making developers work under crunch conditions for reportedly almost 2 years at that point. This also, to me, feels like a guilt trip from Adam and the board towards the developers' partners through how Adam talks up how important Cyberpunk will be to gaming to try to justify this type of work schedule that unnecessarily keeps the developers away from their families for long periods of time. Schreier also mentioned that he asked a couple of CD Projekt devs if it's true that the majority of the team wanted 6-day work weeks over having the game be delayed. They responded that the conversation never took place, one saying that, quote, "We got the email and then a meeting with our team leaders. It was never an option or a question." This quote and more behind the scenes information was later backed up by an anonymous Reddit post that Schreier and others later confirmed to work for CD Projekt Red. The post went on to state that, quote, "Not only did this conversation never happen, but this is just the last in a long list of very toxic behavior from upper management towards us developers. This conversation never happened. If anything, the developers have been crunching non-stop since May of 2019. Mind that we were barely at an alpha at that point. And even though most developers point out that it was impossible to do the whole game almost from scratch in 1 year, they added that, quote, People have been dredging the inevitable 2-year death march since long before the crunch started because they know it's just how CD Projekt rolls, and that upper management will, quote, dick around in pre-production for ages and then rush everyone and work devs to the bone to make up for the time lost. So whether intentional or not, management has set Cyberpunk up to fail from the beginning by being so indecisive on what they want the game to have that they had the team start, scrap, and change the basic skeleton of the game many times over, all while not adding necessary time onto the planned schedule for the actual development of the game. The post then goes on to paint a picture of how ineptly the game's development was managed, stating that management was known to say that, quote, there is no plan B in response to not being able to deliver the game for its initial release date of April 16, 2020. The post also mentioned that the dev team found out that the game was going to be delayed every single time through Twitter first rather than the higher-ups, and the same with the game going gold, showing the lack of communication between management to developers. It goes on to say, quote, many people have been spending the weekends in the office and doing 16 hours per day pretty much since June of 2019, some departments even as far as a year earlier, and that anytime devs would try to address problems with their work conditions, they would get the same platitude CD Projekt's management was known for spewing about their way of development. Quote, we are fueled by passion, we are rebels, this is not for everyone. The post even managed to comment on the year-end profit bonuses devs received that keep coming up in defense of the crunch work CD Projekt puts the development team under. Quote, most developers get a yearly bonus as a pittance, while the upperheads rack up hundreds of thousands of zloty in bonuses. So it even seems that the bonus that gets divided throughout the team isn't as wholesome as some would assume, with this quote alluding that only higher-ups see any actual value from this bonus. On October 27th, CD Projekt announced on Twitter that Cyberpunk was getting delayed again, for the third and final time, from November 19th to December 10th. Following the delay announcement, on October 29th, Schreier shared in a tweet 2 screenshots from Owinski. One, a transcription from a conference call with investors where he's downplaying developers' crunch conditions, saying, quote, actually it's not that bad and never was. A large part of the team is not crunching at all since they finished their work. It's mostly about QA and engineers, programmers, but it's not that heavy. We have feedback from the team, they're happy about the extra 3 weeks, so we don't see any threats regarding crunch. The second screenshot was of an internal mass email of Owinski apologizing for the previous remarks on crunch made in the investor meeting. Quote, from the bottom of my heart, I would like to apologize for what I said during Tuesday's investor conference call. Truth be told, it's only now, when stress connected with the delay decision and the call itself is lifting, that I'm fully realizing the true extent of my words. Please accept my most sincere and honest apologies. He goes on to add, quote, if anyone wants to talk with me directly, I'm in the boardroom on the first floor and on Slack. Now on his face, this seems like a genuine apology for how things have been run and that there may be some room for critique and change for the system that they have instilled for development at CD Projekt. But if we go back to May 2019, we'll see Owinski himself stating that there will be a more humane late-stage development for Cyberpunk and publications, and that the studio had a non-obligatory crunch policy instilled for Cyberpunk, while at the same time, according to the Reddit post, the team was already in crunch while he was giving the interview about not having crunch. Since that's how these events seem to line up, how would you as a developer feel about this apology, seeing as this isn't the first time he's gone in front of people outside the studio to downplay your work conditions while you're in the office crunching away at the project? Also, how would you feel about the invitation to talk with your boss about the work conditions, especially when every time anyone has approached them about the unfinished state of the game relative to the release date, they just gave y'all a list of platitudes and expected y'all to go back to work like this whole project isn't a mismanaged mess? To round out all the stuff that was reported before the release of Cyberpunk, on an investor call from November 27th, Adam Kiesinski stated that Cyberpunk was running, quote, surprisingly good on base PS4 and Xbox One. Quote, we had those extra 3 weeks and we achieved a lot, Kiesinski said. Quote, we believe that the game is performing great on every platform, of course, accordingly to platform capabilities.
Wrong.
So they didn't delay Cyberpunk for a 4th time, and it did finally release on December 10th. But before we get to the release and the problems with that, let's talk about the problems with the review copies. Let's start with the fact that CD Projekt never sent out PS4 or Xbox One review copies of Cyberpunk to outlets, despite reviewers' requests. The withholding of console copies from outlets feels misleading since it only allows them to provide feedback on just the PC SKUs of the game, which typically is the SKU where games run the best. CD Projekt also only allowed outlets to use stock footage of Cyberpunk in their video reviews leading up to its release, as stated in the review embargo. Now it feels like CD Projekt were doubling down on purposefully misleading the consumer by not allowing people to showcase any footage of the game actually running on any of the platforms it was planned to release for, which in turn wouldn't allow possible buyers to see a valid depiction of how the game runs before purchasing it, only getting any depiction of the game's actual performance through verbal and or text-based recaps, which alone can't fully express how a game runs. Basically, since CDPR are the ones providing outlets with the pre-made footage of the game, they get to cherry pick its depiction in video reviews, which in turn allows them to paint the way the general audience perceives Cyberpunk in CD Projekt's favor. At the same time, Leanna Rupert, a Game Informer employee, experienced a horrible bug while playing Cyberpunk during an unskippable plot crucial cutscene which caused her to experience a grand mal seizure. In the cutscene where you're introduced to the brain dance mechanic, which shows up multiple times following this scene, your character puts on a headset that flashes lights at your screen. The bug in question causes the headset to rapidly flash red and white blinking lights at your eyes in a way similar to an actual device neurologists use to trigger seizures in real life for diagnosis purposes. The game originally shipped with no obvious in-game seizure warning, but did have one to EULA. You know, that thing most people don't ever read through? Now, CD Projekt did patch out the flashing for a less severe animation and added a warning in-game immediately after the day one patch. It seems like it would have behooved CD Projekt have originally put a warning in at the start of the game to begin with, if for anything for the minor lights and flashing throughout the game in general. On December 10th, Cyberpunk was released and people could finally get their hands on it. And as we all know, a myriad of bugs and problems were discovered immediately following its launch. For starters, a lot of people experienced a progress halting bug on two different missions, the pickup and the heist, in which Jackie, the friend NPC who accompanies the player on these missions, would straight up cease to exist mid-mission, leaving the player without the ability to progress at all and have to reload her earlier save to solve this problem, which itself wasn't always a clear-cut solution before this issue got fixed with a patch. I myself came across a similar bug with Jackie, but during the Ripper Doc quest. This bug happened 7 times in a row at 2 different points in this one mission. First time was at the very beginning of the quest. After I talked to Jackie about a new job, Jackie and V are supposed to get into a car to go see Vic the Ripper Doc. But when I approached the car to drive, Jackie just disappeared. I tried driving to the objective, walked around the block and back to the car, went up to V's apartment, then back to the car. I even closed and restarted the game. None of it worked. Even the 4 times I reloaded the save right before I had started the quest couldn't save this. The only way I could fix this progress was by loading a save from the tutorial shootout like 25 minutes prior. After that, Jackie was fine. We went to Vic's, I installed my upgrades, I went back to go talk to Jackie, but Jackie wasn't there again.
Daddy wasn't there to take me to the fair. It seems he doesn't care. Daddy wasn't there.
3 times this glitch happened to me after trying the same troubleshooting methods as before. So of course, I had to reload the same save from back at the tutorial again for it to work. This alone almost made me delete the game. PC players also encountered a save corruption bug that triggered only when the save file exceeded the intentional file size cap of 8 megabytes in size. At first glance, that doesn't sound too drastic, until you find out that the save file increasing in size is the result of the player picking up, quote, too many items and crafting too many materials, both common things players are expected to do in RPGs. So what was the solution CD Projekt gave at the time? To pick up and craft less items in an RPG.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Console players also ran into a shit ton of optimization issues, especially on base PS4 and Xbox One. You know, the initial console the games was planned for? Issues such as little to no shadows of textures, objects and NPCs popping in and out of nowhere, an excessive amount of image blurring, frequent game crashes, and extremely low and inconsistent frame rates. Then there are problems with the game that were perceived as bugs but are actually workarounds purposefully implemented by the development team to compensate for the project's mismanagement by the leads and the lack of time the developers had to properly program and refine aspects of the game. In the Twitter thread, game designer Gareth Damian Martin showcased and explained some of these bug-like workarounds the development team had to implement. For example, Gareth mentions that there is a complete lack of object permanence for certain assets within Cyberpunk. Now, games in general do have a limit set for how much object permanence assets have relative to the player's vision and the immediate area surrounding them, but Cyberpunk's limit is damn near non-existent. A quick 360 spin of the camera will result in everything you had just seen disappear from the screen or at the very least change.
while you can. There's a cold front moving in. Prepare for cooler conditions as we head into the weekend.
Well, fuck do you want? Let me tell you something. Anything can be bought for the right price. Well, fuck do you want?
Why are you so mad?
Let me tell you something. Anything can be bought for the right price.
What? Where'd the old man go? Wait, do NPCs just change when you're not looking at them?
Dry, sun-filled week coming your way, Night City. But soak in that sun while you can. There's a cold front moving in. Prepare for cooler conditions as we
I've never seen this in a game! It changed! No, it was real! No, it was a different guy!
Also that the game's driving NPCs don't have any AI programming, but instead are on a guided path and have no ability to navigate around any type of blockade because of it, which would lead you to believe that in the game there'd be massive traffic jams all throughout Night City, right? Nope.
Dude, where's my car? Where's your car, dude?
Because the aforementioned lack of object permanence, cars and even NPCs will disappear as soon as the player looks away for a brief moment. Players also discovered that the police AI were programmed to spawn immediately on the player's position in groups and continue to spawn as the player runs away whenever any crime is committed. Now, after all these bugs, reports of poor optimization, and necessary cut corners, it left many people to think, how could Sony and Microsoft allow a game this bad to come out on their platforms? They certified the game in October, back when the release date was still November, so the game had to be like this for a while now, right? Well, to explain this part of the story, I'm gonna have to refer to Willie Madden, a YouTuber, Twitch streamer, and former QA compliance lead. On episode 98 of his podcast, Castle Super Beast, while discussing the problems with Cyberpunk, Willie touched on compliance waivers and how they worked between publishers and console manufacturers during his time in QA for the PS2 original Xbox and PS3 Xbox 360 generations.
I can't speak for this generation because I wasn't there for it, but I can say that based on previous gens of certification, there were no guidelines against seizure inducing except for Nintendo. They're the only ones that had anti-seizure tech on their guidelines. So Sony and Microsoft didn't really care per se. Steam as well, because Steam does have some guidelines. They're extremely minimal. They're one page, but they do exist. And I saw, some like confusion as to like what the fuck? They basically made a promise about like fixing these major issues, and that's what allowed the game to come out. For the record, every game does this. Waivers of major compliance issues is a common thing in the industry. And a lot of games that are basically in the shit, for better and for worse, as they get near submission, you will find that they'll send you back a list of major fails, and they'll basically go, the game can't come out if you have these things still in your game, whatever. And then it's up to the producer to get on the phone and negotiate waivers for each of the issues that they can. Someone. And at that point, the hardware manufacturer can choose to allow or not. But essentially, there's tons and tons of games that have major issues where they say, if you get it in a day one patch, it'll be okay. If the negotiation is essentially for something that is like catastrophic to the user experience in just the game and not in a like larger console context, you'd be surprised what you can get away with a waiver for. Providing that the day one patch absolutely has it. And if you fuck that up and don't adhere to your promises on that, you lose a fuck ton of standing and ground with them.
Means you won't be able to do it the next time.
You will not be able to do it the next time. You will have infinitely lower priority and you'll have no grounds to negotiate with. And yeah, essentially it's a like, we don't trust you anymore on anything like this moment if you promise waivers for day one fixes and then don't deliver on them. So like submission wise, CD Projekt is fucking hurting.
Do you think
to you.
that they actually fulfilled their promises to Sony and Microsoft for that day one patch, Wooly?
That's what I'm saying. Like, they're in fucking rough standing right now.
Following all this bad press around Cyberpunk's release, CD Projekt issued an apology for the state of the game at launch on their Twitter. They apologized for not showing the game's performance on base PS4 and the Xbox One consoles, and stated that they'll be working on patches to fix prominent PS4 and Xbox One bugs and performance issues. At the end of this apology, they asked for those who are disgruntled with the state the game released in to give them a chance to improve upon the game with future patches, but if not, offer that, quote, you can opt to refund your copy. For copies purchased digitally, please use the refund system with PSN or Xbox respectively. For boxed versions, please try to get a refund at the store where you bought the game. Should this not be possible, please contact us at helpmerefund@cdprojectred.com and we will do our best to help you. This final section of their apology, through the way it was worded, left readers to infer that CD Projekt had some prior conversation with the many sellers, both digital and brick and mortar, about refund requests specific to Cyberpunk and established a standalone refund policy exception for the game, which they didn't. Everything stated in terms of a customer requesting a refund is once again said so vaguely that it leaves too much room for assumption on the consumer's part that they receive a hassle-free refund no matter what. The statement, quote, use the refund system of PSN or Xbox respectively, comes off as if all you need to do to get a refund is submit a request regardless of the platform's return policy limitations and you'll get your money back. But for at least the first few days following this tweet, that wasn't true. The statement's a sly way for CD Projekt to pass the buck on to Sony and Microsoft for any problems that may arise from customers getting a refund for Cyberpunk. For reference of these stores' digital refund policies, Sony's policy is that you have 14 days from the day of purchase to request a refund, and the refund won't be eligible if the product started downloading at any point since the purchase. And Microsoft's policy is that you must submit a request for a refund within 14 days of the purchase, but doesn't necessarily mean you'll get a refund. So following the lack of compliance fixes on the day one patch and the refund apology tweet confusion, Sony started to offer full refunds for Cyberpunk 2077 regardless of the policy standards and delisted the game from PSN until further notice. Then Microsoft also started issuing refunds for anyone that purchased Cyberpunk regardless of the policy, but unlike Sony, didn't remove the game from the Microsoft store page. They did however put up a performance issue warning for Cyberpunk when you go to view and purchase it on the Microsoft store.
But wait! There's more! Hang on to your seat, baby! Cause this one's a screamer!
CD Projekt's management throughout the entire development of Cyberpunk dangled bonuses over the heads of the dev team. Bonuses based off the Metacritic score of Cyberpunk being a 90 or more across both PC and console versions. Well, as reported by Bloomberg, because of the game's several problems and negative fan response possibly dropping the score, alongside CD Projekt's employees being rightfully disgruntled at the bonus itself and voicing that anger to management, the bonuses were given out regardless of the game score. Adam Badowski, in an email to staff, stated, quote, we initially had a bonus system that was focused on the game's ratings and the release date, but after consideration, we believe that measure is simply not fair under the circumstances. Notice how they had a come to our senses moment and rescinded the bonus conditions only due to the massive negative response to the game's performance, and not the general practice of tying the worth of a dev team's work with an arbitrary aggregate score that they have no control over. Also, how the fuck were you bold enough to tie your employees' bonuses to the game's release date despite the fact that you never gave them enough time to actually work on and finish it after they told you countless times that completing the game by any of its planned release dates in the state that it was in was damn near impossible? To make things worse, the article goes on to explain that the way this payout worked was that, quote, every month team leaders at the company gave out tokens to members of their team they felt deserved honors. Those tokens would have been transferred into bonuses if the game met a certain criteria, like critical acclaim and a timely release. If the game met a release that management set themselves and that the devs repeatedly told management wasn't achievable at every step of this game's development, employees were quoted saying that this style of financial reward, quote, pushed them to work longer hours and it implicitly encourages employees to put in nights and weekends to show that they're working the hardest. So one, this was never a bonus for the team as a whole for actually doing a good job, but to individuals who put in extra overtime. So if you didn't work enough overtime because you put your well-being before a video game, you were never going to get this bonus to begin with. And two, this wasn't even a reward for doing your work well, but for just staying longer and looking busy, even if it came at the cost of diminishing returns on how productive someone could be while working on this project. In an internal video board meeting on December 17th, team members asked management about CD Projekt's reputation, the unrealistic deadlines, and overtime leading to the game's release. Jason Schreier reported that, quote, when asked about this crunch time in the Q&A, the director said that they had plans to improve production practices in the future, but didn't elaborate, according to one person who was there. This sounds awfully familiar to a statement Nowinski made in early 2019 about the studio's non-obligatory crunch policy that they had instilled for Cyberpunk's development that it seems like they never actually followed.
Cocaine's a hell of a drug.
Schreier goes on to say, quote, one employee asked the board why it had said in January that the game was complete and playable when that wasn't true, to which the board answered that it would take responsibility.
Really, nigga?
Another developer asked whether CD Projekt's directors felt it was hypocritical to make a game about corporate exploitation while expecting their employees to work overtime. The response was vague and non-committal.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme. Every stanza kind of rhymes with the last one.
Now at this point, people were still trying to figure out exactly how and why this game was released in the state it was in. Well, on December 14th, an investor conference call was released, which clarified a lot of the questions people had surrounding Cyberpunk's release and development process.
Your comment earlier on about kind of the board being too focused on delivery and ignoring problems with old gen. Should we take it that you felt that it was very important that the game shouldn't be delayed into next year, or simply that and you just underestimated the extent to which the last gen version was not going to be the way it should be? So was it kind of more about the launch is important, or more about we underestimated how bad last gen was?
It is more us looking at the, as was previously stated, at the next gens and the PC performance rather than the current gens. I wouldn't say that we felt any external or internal pressure to, launch on the dates any other than a normal pressure with really any release.
So this here clarifies that no one, not fans, not investors, no one but the management team felt the need to get the game out on the release dates they decided. Also that even though they announced the game not a year before the PS4 and Xbox One were to be released, that the leads made the team disregard the performance of Cyberpunk on the initial consoles that it was planned to be released for at some point during this game's development to make sure it ran well on consoles that didn't even have a release date halfway through the game's development time.
In the certification stage, presumably Microsoft and Sony always get games that still have bugs and decide that they're going to be okay, partly on the basis of discussion with you that there will be fixes. Have I understood that correctly, or do you feel somehow that the certification process is kind of on one side or the other?
The first parties are definitely not so good. This is on our side, and if I can say anything, that I can only assume that yes, they were counting that we're gonna fix the things upon the release.
Backing up Wooly's statement from earlier about how CD Projekt had to have structured an agreement with Sony and Microsoft about fixing certain bugs in the game by its release date, so CD Projekt's management lied to Sony and Microsoft about being able to fix said problems just to make a release date. I repeat, management set themselves, despite all the developers' input, that the game couldn't be completed in that amount of time, basically pissing away all the goodwill they had with both platform holders, at least as it pertains to compliancy.
Obviously the gameplay from the old gen consoles wasn't really shown very much. Can you explain why you decided to hold that back?
Footage. We actually showed the console footage, but we actually never showed it on the last gen consoles. And the reason for it is that we are updating the game on the consoles, the last gen consoles, until the very last minute, and
This statement contradicts what Adam Kiesinski said in the November investor call about Cyberpunk running, quote, surprisingly good on base PS4 and Xbox One. Since Nowinski here states that they were still fixing the PS4 and the Xbox One versions up to the release of the game, that means that there wasn't a console version of the game that ran well at all at the time of Kiesinski's quote. He basically knowingly lied to investors about this. It also shows recognition of QA reporting numerous bugs and glitches with the PS4 and Xbox One versions of Cyberpunk. I also love that Iwinski is subtly saying that the board thought the console editions weren't good enough for reviewers to get for free just to review, but was somehow still good enough to charge people $60 for on the release date, or in the special case of the deluxe edition, $100.
So I was wondering if your console partners like Microsoft or Sony will participate in this cost of refund, or it's a financial burden only?
Anybody who has purchased any title on PlayStation Network or Microsoft Storefront can ask for a refund, and if it's made within certain boundaries, and our procedure here with Microsoft and Sony is not different than with any other title released on any of these storefronts.
Even investors were confused by the statement CD Projekt's management team made in reference to Cyberpunk's refunds, so much so that Iwinski had to clarify that CD Projekt had no prior conversation with any store holders about special case refunds for the game, proving the point that they purposefully used vague language in that tweet to obfuscate the fact that management was trying to wash their hands of any wrongdoing and pass the buck to Sony and Microsoft to catch any flack that failed refunds would bring, most likely to keep their public image of good guy CDPR intact. So from management's mistreatment of devs and misrepresentation of Cyberpunk to fans, many felt like they were misled the entire time of the game's development by how the leads represented the status of everything. None more than CDPR's own shareholders, who filed 2 different lawsuits alleging that CD Projekt's statements on Cyberpunk, quote, were materially false and or misleading because they misrepresented and failed to disclose Cyberpunk 2077 was virtually unplayable on the current generation Xbox or PlayStation systems due to an enormous number of bugs. And they weren't alone in expressing how upset with Cyberpunk they were legally, because the Polish government had their Office of Competition and Consumer Protection looking into allegations that the game might be breaking industry standards. Quote, we will check how the producer is working on making corrections or solving difficulties that make it impossible to play on consoles, but also how he intends to act towards people who have made complaints and are dissatisfied with the purchase due to the lack of possibility to play the game on their equipment despite previous assurances, the office stated, adding that if they find CD Projekt at fault, they threaten to dock up to 10% of the company's income. Now this is just me talking, but I think that $7 million grant that Poland gave CD Projekt towards the development of Cyberpunk is a little extra incentive for the government to really monitor the roadmap patching of Cyberpunk. Lastly, since I mentioned the roadmap, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the explanation video that was uploaded to the Cyberpunk Twitter account on January 13th, 2021. In it, Marcin Iwinski is seen taking full blame alongside the rest of the board for the game releasing unfinished, provides an explanation on why the game was shipped in the state it was in, and a roadmap for patch updates, and hopes to regain trust in fans.
Hey everyone, my name is Marcin Iwinski and I'm the co-founder of CD Projekt. Based on that legacy of genuine and honest communication, you've trusted us and pre-ordered our game. And despite good reviews on PC, the console version of Cyberpunk 2077 did not meet the quality standard we wanted it to meet. I and the entire leadership team are deeply sorry for this, and this video is me publicly owning up to that. Please don't fault any of our teams for what happened. Myself and the board are the final decision makers, and it was our call to release the game. I assure you that we'll do our best to regain your trust. Now I'd like to tell you how the situation looked like from the inside. Cyberpunk 2077 is huge in scope. In the game, everything is not stretched out over flat terrain where we can make things less taxing hardware-wise, but condensed in one big city and in a relatively loading-free environment. On its own, this is a challenge, but we made it even more difficult for ourselves by wanting to make the game look epic on PCs and then adjusting it to consoles, especially old gen. And things did not look super difficult at first. We knew the hardware gap, yes, but ultimately, I think that time has proven that we've underestimated the task. To give you a concrete example, and the main culprit, we had to constantly improve our in-game streaming system for all-gen consoles. And since the city is so packed and the disk bandwidth of all-gens is what it is, it constantly challenged us. Every change and improvement needed to be tested, and as it turned out, our testing did not show a big part of the issues you experienced while playing the game. As we got closer to the final release, we saw significant improvements each and every day, and we really believed we would deliver in the final Day Zero update. We started sending our PC review keys in the first days of December. On launch day, December 10th, we hit the ground running with a really good start on PC. While not perfect, it's a version of Cyberpunk we are very proud of. At the same time, we're fighting for quality on all-gen consoles till the very last moment. This is why we started sending console review keys on the 8th of December, which was later than we originally planned. This all happened while working from home with all the challenges resulting from the COVID-related restrictions. A lot of the dynamics we normally take for granted got lost over video calls or email. Now I'd like to tell you about our plans for the future. We have already released 3 hotfixes improving the game, but that's just the beginning. We will of course continue to work on the game in future updates and improvements beyond that. Our big plans for supporting Cyberpunk in the long term did not change, by assuring you that we treat this entire situation very seriously and are working hard to make it right.
And that's how my story ends. Officially, they called it a suicide.
But not today.
Alright, see, there was a couple things wrong with this apology. First, Iwinski tries to downplay the PC audience of Cyberpunk by stating,
and despite good reviews on PC, the console version of Cyberpunk 2077 did not meet the quality standard we wanted it to meet.
Making it seem as if PC players only ran into little trivial problems by solely comparing the PC version of Cyberpunk to the PS4 and Xbox One versions, as if the PC version didn't have an actual save corrupting bug that needed to be patched right before this video was posted. He also consistently references the PS4 and Xbox One SKUs as old gen,
by wanting to make the game look epic on PCs and then adjusting it to consoles, especially old-gen. We had to constantly improve our in-game streaming system for old-gen consoles. And since the city is so packed and the disk bandwidth of old-gens is what it is, at the same time we're fighting for quality on old-gen consoles.
Using this to imply that the hardware is the problem why the game doesn't run well, and not the incompetence of the people in charge not listening to their own developers stating that they need more time to fix the game in general, let alone just on the console versions. By doing this, he's also masking the fact that the game was always supposed to come out on the PS4 and Xbox One. And to put a cherry on top of this half-assed apology, remember when Iwinski started the video saying,
"Please don't fault any of our teams for what happened. Myself and the board are the final decision makers, and it was our call to release the game."
But then he goes on to say,
every change and improvement needed to be tested, and as it turned out, our testing did not show a big part of the issues you experienced while playing the game.
Now, whether intentionally or not, the board is throwing the QA department for Cyberpunk under the bus to take the hit on why Cyberpunk is straight trash, by stating that the studio's testing didn't find a big part of the problems that the players ran into. Comes off as if the board is saying QA is shit at their job since they couldn't find these mostly easy to see problems within the game that players did find on day one. Basically going against what they said they would do in the internal meeting with their team members, where they said that the board would take responsibility for misleading people with the promise that the game was playable back in January of 2020. Also going back on what they said in the investor meeting where Adam and Iwinski responded to a question about not showing PS4 and Xbox One versions of Cyberpunk pre-launch with,
we actually showed the console footage, but we actually never showed it on the last gen consoles. And the reason for it is that we are updating the game on the consoles, the last gen consoles, until the very last minute.
Which again shows some level of acknowledgement that QA reported several problems specifically with the console SKUs of Cyberpunk, which is why they were still fixing that version for so long. So testing did identify and report issues with Cyberpunk throughout the entirety of the game's development. They were just problems that Iwinski and the rest of the board decided weren't important enough to delay the game for, so developers could properly fix them and actually finish the game. Once again, solidifying the point that the board disregarded every single warning that they were presented. And now, even in a fucking apology, management somehow continued to shrug off responsibility for any of this game's shortcomings onto anyone else, and they always mask it with their specific choice and wording of these statements and apologies, again and again just trying to save as little face as possible. Cyberpunk's failed launch and the multiple PR cleanups CD Projekt's leads have been on since are basically par for the course for CD Projekt's management team at this point. Management that has always felt the need to try to maintain that good guy facade while contradictorily keeping their history of horrendous crunch work and the overall mismanagement of projects still intact, but just out of the gaze of the general public, making it very easy to see how Cyberpunk 2077 being a buggy, unfinished, almost incompletable mess out the gate was inevitable. With CD Projekt's management's dysfunctional scheduling and lack of management skills and their deceiving word choice when parlaying the development status of projects. The people in charge who make these type of decisions on projects shouldn't be able to just skate by on regurgitated platitudes and thinly veiled promises of making things better in the future. They need to be held accountable for exploiting their employees. If not, then they'll continue to rationalize to themselves how crunch work is fine, since people keep buying their games regardless of their practices anyway. I don't even know if that sounded good or not. I suck it right, nigga.
Hey, yo, what the fuck?